Sportsbooks have more information than you do, than I do, than all of us combined. And for this reason, they are very helpful in actually looking at projections for what's going to occur this upcoming season. Now, I'm not just looking at one sportsbook. I went across and looked at about the 10 most popular sportsbooks and DFS apps, and I came up with the median projection that they had for receiving yards and receiving touchdowns across the top 50 or 60 fantasy relevant options. I actually threw all of this information into a Google sheet that's posted on flockfantasy.com for anybody who's gotten the season pass so far. But I wanted to dive into the receivers that sportsbooks are telling us are undervalued in drafts at this point. Now, something that may not be as relevant, but I still found interesting is looking at what sportsbooks were saying when it came to the receiving yards leader for this upcoming season. They have it in order of Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, then Nico Collins ahead of Lamb, then Puka Nacua ahead of CeeDee Lamb as well. And then you get CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Tyreek Hill, Drake London, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, of course, we're not just drafting these guys in this order because you're going to get touchdown projections. You're going to get some projections for just overall target volume. But looking at the wide receivers that are favored to lead the NFL in receiving touchdowns, you had Jamar Chase at 1. You had Justin Jefferson at 2. Mike Evans at 3. Terry McLaurin, honestly, you can maybe just push to the end of this video where we'll talk about him. You only have one sportsbook putting out a touchdown mark for him. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., and AJ Brown. So one thing from the early round wide receivers that I think may be an interesting note is while I have moved CeeDee Lamb ahead of Justin Jefferson in my rankings this season, we can actually see that the majority of experts on flockfantasy.com have also moved CeeDee Lamb ahead of Justin Jefferson given the hamstring news. Sportsbooks don't view it that way. They still have Justin Jefferson the better option as opposed to CeeDee Lamb. So maybe if you are able to get the 106 and get Justin Jefferson at a value, this could be just a buy low moment. Now, going over to round 2, this is something that I was blown away with. As I went through and got all the receiving yards marks, the receiving touchdown marks, and added that up to the fantasy points column, I actually found that the teardrop that I always try to avoid in drafts isn't really a teardrop. So I've always viewed it, and you can see this in my rankings on flockfantasy.com, that, at wide receiver, you really need to go out there and you really need to make sure that you can get somebody inside the top 8. Like after the tier of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas, you're going to have a pretty big teardrop down to Drake London and AJ Brown. However, sportsbooks are saying that's not the case. If you look at the receiving yardage marks, they're sitting with 1,100 receiving yards over under for Drake London as well as AJ Brown. The receiving touchdowns is 7.5, which is higher than Nico, higher than Brian Thomas, slightly below Amon-Ra St. Brown, but the same as Puka Nacua and Malik Neighbors. And what I did is I calculated the fantasy points that you should expect from receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. And you can see that 155 points will be the projection for London and AJ Brown, which is actually slightly ahead of like Brian Thomas, Nico Collins, right behind Puka, Neighbors, and Amon-Ra. And now I'm not telling you that, you need to take Drake London ahead of these guys. You need to take AJ Brown ahead of them. But realistically, I think we can say maybe I was wrong, and maybe these are very compelling picks to make at the beginning or the middle of the second round of your draft. Now, I'm also going to highlight the Underdog pick'ems as we go through this for a couple different reasons. One, I know we're all drafting on Underdog, so we already have the app. And two, Underdog Pick'em is available in way more states than just sports betting. And here you have Drake London on Underdog Pick'em actually up at 1,124.5 receiving yards, which is the same mark as AJ Brown. So Underdog Pick'em actually has the receiving yardage even higher for London and AJ Brown this next season. If we use the range of outcomes tool on flockfantasy.com, you'll see that Drake London's age 23 season was very comparable to players who won leagues at 24. His age 23 season was right in line with Jamar Chase from 2023. Look at what Jamar Chase did in 2024. It was right in line with Julio Jones in 2012, and Julio Jones in 2013 blew up to 22 points per game. It was right in line with Amon-Ra St. Brown back in 2022. The following year, he averaged over 20 points per game. And then you have guys like Michael Thomas, Deshaun Jackson, Jarvis Landry, AJ Brown, Brandon Cooks, and Hakeem Nicks showing you age 23 seasons that were similar. And then looking at A.J. Brown's age 27 year, what's very important to note is if you look at Davante Adams from 2019, he had almost an identical season. In the following year, Davante Adams averaged 25 points per game. Adam Thielen jumped up from 15 points per game to 19. AJ Green scored 18.5 points per game the following season. So the main takeaway that I have here with these sportsbooks projections for the early rounds will be Jefferson may be ahead of Lamb. And also, there's a much larger tier gap from Drake London and A.J. Brown to the tier below with like Ladd McConkey, Tyreek Hill, and T. Higgins than there is from the Nico Collins, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown down to London and A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown and London are closer to those top level options. Now, the next wide receiver that sportsbooks are much higher on than the expert average ranking on flockfantasy.com is actually going to be Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is sitting at wide receiver 22 when it comes to the average expert ranking, which is right in line with like Ted McMillan, Cortland Sutton, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy. However, Terry McLaurin across most sportsbooks is at 975 receiving yards for his over-under and 6.5 receiving touchdowns. And Underdog Pick'em has Terry McLaurin even higher than that at 1,024.5 receiving yards, higher, lower. We go ahead and we look at Terry McLaurin. Typically, with the range of outcomes tool, we are expecting some natural regression from age 29 to age 30. I understand Terry McLaurin was just drafted in 2019, the same year as A.J. Brown, but he stayed forever at Ohio State. So he's actually a much older player than you would assume. Now, moving over to the next middle round target that you should maybe have here is going to be DK Metcalf. Like DK Metcalf projects score 134 fantasy points in comparison to Xavier Worthy at 129, Travis Hunter at 102, Devonta Smith 121, George Pickens 123, and Jamison Williams at about 121. Now, one thing that I will point out here is kind of ignore the rookie projections with their over-unders. Like if you look at Ted McMillan, he's also going to be pretty low on that list. And it's just because the wide receivers obviously are going to start slow at the beginning of the year, but you're drafting them hoping that they can turn into top 5 options in fantasy football in the second half of their rookie seasons, similar to what we had with Jamar Chase back as a rookie. Looking at Underdog Pick'em, DK Metcalf is same thing as he is in sportsbooks. Higher, lower, 950 receiving yards, and higher, lower, 6.5 receiving touchdowns. What's interesting is with the range of outcomes tool on flockfantasy.com, DK Metcalf had similar age 27 seasons to Cooper Kupp, who blew up the following year to average 25 points per game. Eric Decker, who improved going into his age 28 season. Tyler Lockett, who improved going into his age 28 season. And then obviously you have some guys that declined here like Kenny Golladay, Christian Kirk, Brian Hartline. But I would say that DK Metcalf's probably a lot closer to the Tyler Lockett, Eric Decker range, given the contract that he just earned. Now, obviously, as we go through all this, I want to remind y'all that 1, the range of outcomes tools on flockfantasy.com, and 2, we just posted all this Vegas sportsbook data. If you want to look at these updated projections on the site as well, just go to the draft guide section. That's the same section where we have all of our 2025 flock draft sheets. And if you don't already have access to that, I would highly recommend taking advantage of the best offer we've ever had on the site. For $34, you are going to get access to everything on flockfantasy.com. Not only that I post, not only all our rankings through the entire year, not only all the tools on the site, but you're also going to get a bunch of expert advice from other creators as well, where they have all their draft guides posted there. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you are also going to be getting free start sit questions and free trade questions for me to answer during the live stream every night during the season. Links in the description and the comment section. Again, it's not a subscription. It's a $34 one-time fee. Now, going over and looking at DJ Moore. DJ Moore has an average expert ranking of wide receiver 30 on flockfantasy.com. I have him at wide receiver 25. I'm thinking that when we draft the Flock League on Saturday, I'm probably going to walk away with DJ Moore. The projections that you have from sportsbooks this next season have DJ Moore over under 975 receiving yards, over under 6 receiving touchdowns for a total of 133.5 fantasy points, which just runs away with everybody in this range compared to Roma Dunze, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, and Zay Flowers. If you look at the Underdog Pick'ems, they're actually even higher on DJ Moore, where they have DJ Moore higher, lower, 999.5 receiving yards. And then if we go through and look at the range of outcomes tool for DJ Moore, his age 27 season doesn't comp great great historically. You have somebody like Amari Cooper from 2021, but obviously you just have absolutely everything changing with the situation overall with Caleb Williams going into year 2 and with a completely new coaching staff. Now, another receiver that projects to be a great target, and whenever I'm using the mock draft simulator on Flock Fantasy, I've actually noticed that I draft Calvin Ridley in the 6th round almost every single time. With Calvin Ridley, the Titans actually project to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. If you go over to that Google sheet I posted with all the sportsbook data, you can see that we posted the team points that sportsbooks have out as well for these offenses. And they have the Tennessee Titans at over under 347.5 points, which would mark them the 5th worst scoring offense in the entire league. And typically we're trying to avoid wide receivers on teams that are this bad. But at this point, you can actually see that on flockfantasy.com, the expert average rank for Calvin Ridley is wide receiver 34. So if you draft him and just get a top 24 finish, you're returning value. And again, if we go back and look at the teams where sportsbooks were the most wrong last year, it was the teams with rookie quarterbacks that surprised to the upside, such as the Washington Commanders, as well as the Denver Broncos. Do I think it's a possibility that Cam Ward turns into Jaden Daniels? Hell no, but there is a possibility that Cam Ward turns into Bo Nix. Looking at the other wide receivers, like Josh Downs projects at 91 fantasy points. Zay Flowers is at 117, Jalen Waddle 119, Chris Godwin 102, and Igbuka 86. If you look at Underdog, they currently have Calvin Ridley the same exact marks as sportsbooks do. They have him higher, lower, 924.5 receiving yards, higher, lower, 5.5 receiving touchdowns. And if we go through and look at Calvin Ridley's age 30 season and look at what wide receivers typically did at 31 years old, you had Santana Moss from 2009 to 2010, averaging 14.5 points per game. Cooper Kupp, 14.5 points per game this past season. Marquise Colston, Larry Fitzgerald, Marvin Jones, Demaryius Thomas, Mike Williams, Nate Washington. Really every single wide receiver that had a similar season to Calvin Ridley at 30. At 31, they gave you at least 10 fantasy points per game, which is right in line with what Ridley did last year. So I wouldn't expect any worse of a season from Calvin Ridley. I would expect kind of just him to stay in line. Now, Jawan Jennings is also a player that I will probably end up getting stuck with in the Flock League, just because in your regular redraft league, I even see this whenever we made the draft sheets on the site for ESPN, made the draft sheets on the site for Sleeper, Yahoo. Like those regular redraft leagues, Jawan Jennings goes extremely late. Underdog drafts, he does get pushed up a bit. But right now, sportsbooks have Jennings at 118 fantasy points, which just absolutely crushes Deebo Samuel, Matthew Golden, Jaden Reed, Ricky Pearsall, Stephon Diggs. Obviously, there's going to be the calf strain that we need to monitor. And I will say, I'm not the biggest Jawan Jennings guy in the world, but if we go back over to what sportsbooks are saying from these individual offenses, they're projecting the Niners to score 418 points this next season, only behind the Buccaneers, Chiefs, Commanders, Eagles, Lions, Bengals, Ravens, and Bills. And we're pretty excited about all those wide receivers. And the wide receiver that I would say this entire video is about is going to be Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman, I have ranked much higher than any other expert on the site. I am already expecting that Keon Coleman is mine. This is going to be somebody that I am walking away with. I saw his Underdog pick'em way earlier in the offseason. They have him higher, lower, 5.5 receiving touchdowns, which is higher than Garrett Wilson. They have Garrett Wilson higher, lower, 4.5 receiving touchdowns. It's higher than Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy's higher, lower, 3.5 receiving touchdowns. And I mean, maybe you say, oh, okay, well, Mason, Underdog's wrong there. Well, I can point you over and I can look at what sportsbooks have out, and they have Keon Coleman at 108 fantasy points, which is higher than Michael Pittman Jr., higher than Cooper Kupp, higher than Jaden Higgins, higher than any wide receiver that he goes alongside. And we can actually go to the range of outcomes tool on flockfantasy.com and see that every wide receiver that had a similar age 21 season to Keon Coleman since 2008 got better from their rookie season to their second year outside of Jalen Reagor and Gabe Davis. But the other wide receivers that had similar age 21 years, DJ Moore jumped from 9.8 points per game up to 15.5. Jackson Smith-Njigba jumped from 8.8 to about 15. Kenny Britt jumped from 8.01 to about 14.5. George Pickens jumped from 9.5 to 12.5. Kenny Stills jumped from about 8 to 11.5. Robert Woods increased from about 8.5 to 10.5. Now, if you're drafting in like a 10-team ESPN league, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, reality, Keon Coleman's not going to matter there. Like if you're using the draft sheets we have posted on flogfantasy.com, you probably won't draft Keon Coleman in a format like that. But where you do want to draft Keon Coleman is if you have to start 3 wide receivers, or if you have multiple flex spots where all of a sudden the wide receiver depth is definitely going to matter more than it otherwise would. But I think that's all I got for you. I really do appreciate y'all checking out this video. Again, I will have all the sheets posted on flogfantasy.com for y'all, including quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends. We're going to keep those updated as well. We're looking at every single sportsbook line we can possibly find. And if you want to get access to all those sheets, if you want to get access to dedicated draft guides for your exact platform and your exact league settings, it's all on flogfantasy.com. We currently have that $34 season pass still available, where if you use code FLOCK, you're going to be getting free trade questions and start sit questions for me to answer during the season. And you'll get access to everything on the site until January 1st. But I really appreciate you, and I really hope I get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.